Peace and blessings, family. How are you all doing? Isn't it a great day to be in the so-called woke category? Because if you're still asleep, you certainly won't be able to understand what is going on in this crazy mixed up world. Don't you think it's a bit curious that they're against the woke culture? I mean, just think about that. What are they really against? Those who can see what's really going on. And they're exposing what? Truth. The enemy does not like truth because he's the father of lies and deception. And we're going to be exposing some of that in this session. So before I get started, welcome to all of our new and returning listeners. Thanks for joining me for this session. Whew, we have a lot to dig into, family. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about why the rights of so-called African Americans, and I'll be using that term because that's who they're referring to. Of course, we know who we are, but why are the rights of so-called African Americans and the alphabet community the same? We're going to talk about this and why it's imperative for the people of the Most High to uncouple themselves from this unholy union. This is also a part of the come out from among them command that's often overlooked. You're going to see that as a people, we were yoked to something that is not of the Most High, and it's time to renounce it. So we're going to dig into this. Again, how did our right to exist as a people who were created by the Most High get linked with sexual orientation? All right, let's dig into it.
Administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector. With the recent yet somewhat unexpected great Supreme Court decision just made, America will once again become a merit-based country.
A merit-based country, right. On his first day back in the Oval Office, Donald Trump signed an executive order ending what he called, quote, radical and wasteful diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in federal agencies. It's unclear how many workers ultimately will be affected, but what is evident is the impact this will have on the government and the country. Trump's actions echo President Woodrow Wilson's then unprecedented segregation of federal offices in 1913. There was no official law, no executive order, just guiding policy. But that policy led to blacks being segregated or just summarily dismissed from federal positions nationwide. For example, in 1914, Wilson required a photo from all federal job applicants to make it easier for racial screening. And those black workers who managed to keep their jobs, they were often subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment. In an open letter to Wilson, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, quote, "We are told that one colored clerk who could not actually be segregated on account of the nature of his work has consequently had a cage built around him to separate him from his white companions of many years." Take a second to let that sink in. A cage.
Can we just say that if things are truly going to be based on merit, a lot of his cabinet selections would have been excluded? But I digress. So I can say that there are certain things that I agree with, particularly as it pertains to not being explicit about there being two genders or having men compete in women's sports. That's ridiculous.
So this article from CBS News says Trump doesn't only want to end DEI, he's also voiding a civil rights era anti-discrimination rule. It says his order does not invalidate the law, and private and federal employees are still protected from discrimination as laid out under the Civil Rights Act. But his order does strike down the 1965 rule prohibiting contractors that do business with the government from taking race, gender, and the other protected criteria into account. More broadly, revoking the 60-year-old Equal Employment Opportunity Order eliminates a bedrock of civil rights protection for American workers, signaling an effort to target workplace issues that go beyond DEI, labor experts say. It says while DEI is shorthand for programs that encourage equality in the workplace for women, minorities, and other groups, the Equal Employment Opportunity Rule prohibited federal contractors from engaging in acts of discrimination, such as refusing to hire someone due to their race or paying an employee less because of their gender. So in essence, it rescinded a requirement for new government contracts to explicitly prohibit segregation, particularly in facilities like restaurants and waiting rooms. So critics are saying that by removing the explicit prohibition, it's sending a message of toleration for discrimination. So it's going to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the federal government for what they called the marginalized groups. Now let's make sure we understand these terms. What exactly is a marginalized group? This says a marginalized group is a population that is systematically disadvantaged or excluded from elements of social, economic, political, and cultural life. This can occur due to discrimination, traditional practices, or the characteristics of democracies whereby the majority rules and may design social systems to benefit themselves. Let's read that again. They are systematically disadvantaged or excluded from elements of social, economic, political, and cultural life. So the fact that these people are identified this way tells you that they know they're doing these things to them, and they're telling you why they are doing it, because majority rules. Do you see why they have to inflate their numbers to make it seem like they are in the majority? But let's go on, because there's a lot more to this. Now, I want to make sure this is very plain so that we know exactly what they are saying here. The term marginalized refers to individuals or groups that are relegated to an unimportant or powerless position within a society or group. We know that they purposely create certain words and categories because they need to label things and put you in a certain box. So we can't just look at the word, we have to look at its meaning. They are telling us that marginalized people are unimportant or powerless. And who are the people they consider to be marginalized? Well, they list various groups. The first group is focusing on ethnicity. Now, except for indigenous populations, the others on this list still benefit from privileges in the majority category. When you look at ethnicity, ethnicity is made up of people who share a common descent or cultural background. Here's the thing. Ethnicity describes cultural identity, while race is usually seen as biological. But what do they use to discriminate against our people? Race. They look at skin color. So a white woman would have the same rights as a white man because they're a part of the so-called important group. Next on the list is sexual orientation. And we're going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I just want you to think about this one. If you're a white man, you're classified with those in the important or empowered category, right? White males are not systematically disadvantaged or excluded from elements of social, economic, political, and cultural life. No, they need another label to be considered marginalized. But no one will know that you're gay unless you want it to be known. Same with white women. Now, the last one is indigenous people, and they're talking about Native Americans. They are also marginalized or unimportant. They were the original people here who happened to have dark melanated skin, by the way. But they decided that they are now unimportant. So who decided who would belong to the important versus unimportant group? Well, the majority, of course, the majority, and they happen to be white. Do you see that this all boils down to skin color? So they came up with this bright idea to give the marginalized people civil rights. Well, we need to know what civil rights are. It says a civil right is a right that ensures equal social opportunities and equal protection under the law. If someone faces discrimination based on their race, age, gender, religion, or other personal characteristics, their civil rights have been violated. Governments are responsible for protecting people from discrimination, which means enforcing laws and holding individuals and institutions accountable for civil rights violations. Now, if they're saying that civil rights are for the marginalized groups, if you just take that at face value, you would say it sounds pretty good. Based on this definition they list here, we should all be treated the same when it comes to social, economic, political, and cultural rights. Because this is saying the law is going to protect us. But this is the kicker. You have to prove that your civil rights were violated. And we know how difficult that has been for us. Here's the problem. There's a difference between human rights and civil rights. Let's look at this. A simple definition is that human rights are the right you have simply for being a human being. Who gave that right to us? Comparatively, civil rights are contextual, meaning you are entitled to specific civil rights through being a citizen of a particular country, nation, or state. Civil rights are proclaimed by the government for the citizens of that country, meaning it is bestowed by the government, while human rights are derived from natural law and are universally protected and applied. Do you see? America used laws to take away our human rights because of our ethnicity. They used law to create other laws to protect the ethnicity from discrimination, and we all know they've done a horrible job with that. But the key is that our skin color and ethnicity should never be classified under a civil law. They didn't give that to us. The Most High did. It's a human right. It's our right to exist in this brown body. This is what was stripped away during slavery. The dignity and right of being created by the Heavenly Father was used to discriminate against us, and they withheld the basic rights that came with it. What they've done is to now create a law, a civil law or political law, to protect something that was inherent. So then the hand that giveth can also take it away. Do you see how they've tried to maintain their level of control over us? They are still trying to be the master. Who gave them the right to exist? Do they need a law to tell them that they have basic human rights? Do you see the difference between human versus civil rights? It was pride and hubris for them to even equate our right as human beings with a civil law. We should all be indignant about this. They can't give us something that our Creator gave to us. No, what they did was to use laws to deny what was given to us. They try to anyway. So they call themselves giving us civil rights while they continue to deny human rights and civil liberties. The same laws should protect us that protect white Americans. Let's look at this from U.S. News. It's saying civil liberties and civil rights describe two ways the United States legal system protects the interests of individuals. Though often used interchangeably, the two terms are distinct. They're different. The term civil liberties stands for the constitutional guarantees of freedom from governmental oppression and tyranny. So we were not given civil liberties. It says the term civil rights refers to a variety of laws protecting citizens from unequal or discriminatory treatment based on certain characteristics, including race, religion, gender, and country of origin. In short, civil liberties protect an individual's personal freedoms, whereas civil rights advance specific standards of equality. So it says, the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech, which safeguards an individual's right to express opinions without government censorship, is a textbook civil liberty. The Fair Housing Act's prohibition of discrimination against prospective renters and home buyers on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, familial status, or religion is an example of a civil right. So they use Jim Crow and black codes to hinder or block us from having civil liberties. Those rights were provided under the Constitution. How did they get around it? Well, they tried to strip away our humanity using three-fifth clauses to count our people as half humans. That's what they did initially. So now they're saying, well, we're going to correct that by offering you civil rights. This is going to get deep. Let's keep going. So then, in 1783, they had a trial in Massachusetts that said all men are born free and equal. You would think that this is agreeing with the fact that all people have basic rights as humans. So the Walker decision included language from the Declaration of Independence and the 1780 state constitution, which said that all men are born free and equal, and that every subject or person was entitled to liberty and legal protection as well as life and property. It says, in short, the court ruled the state is totally repugnant or against the idea of being born slaves. There can be no such thing as perpetual servitude unless the individual's liberty is forfeited by some criminal misconduct. So what happened? During slavery, they stripped away rights based on color using laws, and later created civil laws to give rights based on color. so the one who gives it can also take it away, right? And then they say, there's no such thing as perpetual servitude unless the individual's liberty is forfeited by some criminal misconduct. Notice they didn't define the type of conduct. It does not differentiate between petty crimes or serious crimes. They were leaving themselves a loophole like this one, the 1798 law that Trump just used to deport migrants. This comes from BBC. It says, what is the 1798 law that Trump used to deport migrants? The Alien Enemies Act grants the President of the United States sweeping powers to order the detention and deportation of natives or citizens of an enemy nation without following the usual processes. It was passed as part of a series of laws in 1798 when the U.S. believed it would enter a war with France. The act states that whenever there shall be a declared war, key word, or any invasion or predatory incursion shall be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the U.S., all subjects of the hostile nation or government could be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. Now I ask, are we at war? Has he declared war? I'm showing this so that you can see how they leave little loopholes. Because Mike Huckabee is still thinking that there's a loophole regarding the Dred Scott decision. He says he believes the Dred Scott decision is still the law of the land regardless of the 14th Amendment. It says Republican presidential candidate, that's when he was running, argued that the 1857 Supreme Court ruling, which declared that blacks did not have a right to be citizens, was still the law of the land, even though the 14th Amendment overturned it. Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee argued that the 1857 Supreme Court ruling, which declared that blacks did not have a right to be citizens, was still the law of the land. Still the law of the land. So he's making that decision because of something Jefferson said. He says, it goes back to what Jefferson said, that if a decision is rendered that is not born out of the will of the people, either through their elected people and gone through the process, if you just say it's the law of the land because the court decided, then Jefferson said you now have surrendered to judicial tyranny. He's saying the court made that decision without going through the process to make sure it was the will of the people. And we certainly know the southern states did not approve. I say again, the source that gave it can also take it away. They can also change it at will, because they already said certain groups are unimportant and powerless. This is why they believe that the rights of so-called African Americans and the alphabet community are the same. The two are not the same. And our people shouldn't have just questioned our rights being compared to gay rights. They should have rejected it outright. White Americans have their basic human rights. They were also given special privileges based on their skin color. That same group of people can also decide that they want to have a different sexual orientation and receive rights for that as well. On the other hand, our people were fighting to just have their basic human rights upheld. And they're comparing the two? Let me show you how they did it.
Nationwide, more than 11 million people are part of the LGBTQ community, and thanks to the Supreme Court, they now have equal workplace protections. CBS 17's Holden Kowicki joins us now outside of the LGBT Center of Raleigh, where he's getting answers about exactly what this decision means here in North Carolina.
Groundbreaking. That's how one advocate described the Supreme Court decision that gives members of the LGBTQ community equal protections within the workplace. But for Equality NC Director Kendra Johnson, the decision has a deeper meaning.
I've had to hide who I was, question who I could be out about, question who I could talk about my kids with or my partner.
After years of fighting for change, Johnson views the Supreme Court victory as a small step in the right direction.
Everyone should be valued for their intrinsic dignity and worth, and that the only thing that should determine why we're fired is our job performance.
However, with 3 justices voting against the protections, Johnson says there's still work to be done.
They use something called intersectionality. Do you all know what that is? Intersectionality is a critical concept that recognizes how individuals hold multiple identities, forming an intersectional identity that faces unique challenges at the intersections of those identities. So it says understanding intersectionality is a cornerstone in fostering inclusivity and equality for all individuals, especially those facing numerous forms of oppression. In other words, because you're a so-called black person, you're a black woman, and you're also a black gay woman, you meet 3 of the requirements for the marginalized groups. So because of this overlap, the same rights should apply to all who are marginalized. That's how they did it.
This noon, a landmark decision from the Supreme Court. It has ruled 6-3 that LGBT workers are protected from employment discrimination. The court ruled the Civil Rights Act of 1964 covers gay and transgender employees. Justices John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch joined the liberal wing of the court in the decision. Most states do not have laws protecting gay and transgender people from bias in the workplace. So this ruling will have an impact on more than 8 million LGBT workers.
Now let's just think about this. Someone who decides to enter into a same-sex relationship can decide that one day that's not who they are. Do we have that same ability to turn off our ethnicity? Our right to our ethnic identity and race is now lumped in with someone who can decide to be or not to be. But who fights for us to maintain our inherent rights? Was this strategy to fight for civil rights Yah's ultimate plan for us? I know this is a sensitive topic because a lot of us may have family members who fought and lost their lives because of the fight. But what was the fight about initially? It was for racial equity, as in the same rights you have because of your white skin should apply to us with brown skin. It had nothing to do with a sexual preference, but something changed. So let's do some digging. This says Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for racial equality by leading nonviolent protests and mobilizing communities against systemic injustices. He spearheaded the Montgomery bus boycott, which resulted in a Supreme Court ruling against bus segregation. King founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to coordinate civil rights efforts. His leadership in key events such as the March on Washington and his emphasis on nonviolence played essential roles in achieving landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Acts. But what was the fight supposed to be about? Racial equity. But if you only know about the efforts of Dr. King and you don't know who this man is, you won't get the full picture. Bayard Rustin. It says why MLK's right-hand man was nearly written out of history. Why was he nearly written out of history? He was Dr. King's right-hand man. So it says on the morning of August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to a crowd of more than 200,000 people from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, marking the 100-year anniversary of Lincoln's delivery of the Gettysburg Address. King hoped to mend the racial fractures within the country. The crowds had gathered for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Jobs and Freedom, a platform for his seminal I Have a Dream speech. While King spoke as the face of the civil rights movement, another man stood behind the scenes, an indispensable force within the movement. He was Bayard Rustin, a man whose life was shaped by the very prejudices the movement fought against, not only because of his race, but also because he was gay. Rustin would spend his life fighting for the rights of others, even while facing discrimination of his own. It goes on. Dr. King had read Gandhi, it says, but at that point he hadn't accepted pacifism as a way of life. And so when Rustin arrived in Montgomery, Dr. King's home was full of guns, Long explains. It was Bayard Rustin and a few other pacifists who really encouraged Dr. King to accept pacifism as a way of life. Now you tell me, did Europeans get what they got as a result of pacifism? I don't think so. It says, at the urging of Rustin, pacifism and nonviolence would become cornerstones of the civil rights movement. But the meeting would mark the beginning of a long, sometimes tenuous relationship between the two. When they met, King was aware of Rustin's sexual orientation and of Rustin's 1953 arrests on a morals charge. He was in a car with two men. You figure the rest out. However, Rustin showcased brilliant strategies. There we go again. Where did the strategy come from? You all, we got to get this. It says he showcased brilliant strategies and organization skills, areas where King, while a rousing speaker and a strong leader, wasn't as strong. So Rustin's sexual orientation was overlooked, at least for the time being. It goes on. Rustin was a part of King's inner circle as the civil rights movement grew in the 1950s, but others considered him a liability. Tensions came to a head, and the worst fears of civil rights activists were realized at the 1960 Democratic National Convention. Randolph, King, and Rustin had begun arrangements to march at the Democratic National Convention of presidential candidate John F. Kennedy and his running mate Lyndon B. Johnson in Los Angeles, protesting the party's lackluster position on civil rights. In response, Democratic leadership sent Black Congressman Adam Clayton Powell to stop the march before it happened, and he used Rustin's sexual orientation as his weapon. Prior to the convention, Powell sent an intermediary to threaten King, telling him that if they proceeded with the march, he would accuse King of having an affair with Rustin, not only killing the march, but also dealing a possibly fatal blow to the movement as a whole. After consulting with his colleagues and advisors, including his close confidant, advisor, and speech writer, Clarence Jones, King decided to distance himself from Rustin. Rustin's reluctant resignation from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference marked one of the few times that King lost a battle to fear. No, the battle was already lost, I think. This says Rustin continued his work with Randolph on civil rights issues outside of the umbrella of the SCLC. And during the years that he wasn't involved, it says the movement saw little progress. So King recognized that the movement so many had sacrificed their lives for was losing steam, and he slowly brought him back. So it says, this way, when the March on Washington, a proposal made by Randolph the year prior, would start to take shape, Rustin would already be involved. Unfortunately for Rustin, detractors from within the movement still opposed his involvement. When it was proposed that Rustin organize a re-envisioned version of the March on Washington that had been canceled 20 years prior, Roy Wilkins, executive secretary of the NAACP, was adamantly opposed. So this is what Rustin's partner said about the matter. It was a personally painful situation for him, I think, because he was disappointed that Dr. King didn't stand up for him or didn't have more backbone. This is what Walter Nagel said. But he also said, in all fairness to Dr. King and to Bayard, Bayard understood that this was a political move, and it was probably better for Dr. King to do what he did, politically speaking, in terms of the movement. So in response to Powell's threat, Jones fought fire with fire. He told Powell if he went to the media with the fabricated rumor about King, he would litter Harlem, the district that Powell represented, with posters and pictures of all the women that Powell had slept with. So you can see this got ugly. It said the threat worked, and King proceeded to protest the 1960 Democratic Convention with Rustin as the sole casualty. But it would seem that the impact of what was once the movement's Achilles heel had lost its effectiveness. Not only did King come out in support of Rustin when questioned by the media, all of the leaders within the movement did. Even Wilkins put his reservations aside for the sake of progress. The march went on to be more successful than anyone could have imagined and marked a turning point for both the country and for Rustin. Note it didn't say for King. It came at the end of a summer of terror in the South. The assassination of Medgar Evers, the Birmingham fire hoses and dogs. There was a lot of discouragement and frustration, Nagel recalls. Along came the March on Washington, and I think it really re-energized people, inspired them, lifted up their hope again, and renewed the spirit. Following the success of the march, Rustin and King would continue to work together for years. Listen, although their views still clashed from time to time, instead of directly involving Rustin, King and Lewis held a caucus to nominate Randolph to lead the march. Randolph, a respected figure in the movement, wouldn't garner opposition from others. But King and Lewis also knew that if Randolph became the official director of the march, he would appoint Bayard as his deputy, and Bayard would really be the one who would lead the march. So with Randolph as the director and Rustin as his deputy, arrangements for the march were underway, and once again, Rustin's past and personal life were used to try and stop the movement. Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina brought nationwide media attention to Bayard after claiming that the march was being organized by communists, draft dodgers, and homosexuals. So NPR had this article, says long before same-sex marriage, adopted son could mean life partner. What does that mean exactly? Well, civil rights leader Bayard Rustin and Walter Nagel became partners in the 1970s and were together until Rustin's death. Decades before gay marriage was an option, Rustin adopted Nagel to lend legal protection to their relationship. Just pause and think on that. So Big Think says, after black people used nonviolent protests to win civil rights, Rustin said, what had previously been a movement seeking exclusively racial goals, what was the intent initially? They were seeking racial goals. Well, he said it was now called upon to challenge the fundamental class nature of the economic structure. And this new agenda required a different and broader alliance of political forces. Rustin was not naive. He understood that a successful liberal political alliance is enormously difficult to build and once pieced together, even more difficult to maintain given the inevitable tensions, rivalries, and antagonisms of the various partners. Still, he believed that forging such an alliance was necessary. Rustin insisted that realizing the goals of a new civil rights agenda meant that blacks needed allies who share common problems and pursue common goals. What are we talking about? Intersectionality. And the main challenge was picking the right allies on the basis of their specific programs and proven willingness to cooperate with a political partner. Here's what Eleanor Holmes Norton had to say about Rustin in the CBS News article. She said Bayard was the real general here, and he acted like a general, telling us all what to do, and when to do it, and how to do it, Norton said. You needed an organizer, but you needed somebody with charisma to make you want to follow him. That was his gift. So I'm just going to read a snippet from this. It says, in a 1964 interview with Robert Penn Warren for the book Who Speaks for the Negro, Rustin also reflected that his integrative ideology began to differ from King's. He believed a social movement has to be based on the collective needs of a people at this time, regardless of color, creed, or race. When did they lose the fight? Let's keep going. It says Rustin argued that since black people could now legally sit in the restaurant after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, they needed to be able to afford service financially. It says he also argued that the African American community was threatened by the appeal of identity politics, particularly the rise of black power. He thought this position was a fantasy of middle-class black people that repeated the political and moral errors of previous black nationalists, while alienating the white allies needed by the African American community. So, Nation editor and Harvard Law professor Randall Kennedy states that Rustin had a disdain for nationalism, but he had a very different attitude toward Jewish nationalism. He said he was very supportive of Zionism. So it goes on to talk about how Rustin in 1985 publicly praised a man named Podhoretz for his refusal to pander to minority groups and for opposing affirmative action quotas in hiring, as well as Black Studies programs in colleges. Listen, because of these positions, Rustin was criticized as a sellout by many of his former colleagues in the civil rights movement, especially those connected to grassroots organizing. They charged that he was lured by the material comforts that came with a less radical and more professional type of activism. Biographer John D'Amelio rejects these characterizations and portrays the final third of Rustin's life as one in which his reputation among his former allies was routinely questioned. Well, I wonder why. I wonder why it was questioned. Let's keep going. So how did this unholy union come together? Well, the groups who were working to promote the same-sex agenda saw that the Black Freedom Marches were successful even after Rustin was exposed. So they decided to start using the same strategies. It says, The white gay activists who previously had been refusing to take to the streets looked around and said, maybe it's time. Maybe not right now, but maybe in the near future. In fact, in 1979, activists would organize a national march on Washington for gay and lesbian rights, and it drew an estimated 200,000 protesters. It says Cervini said FBI reports explicitly connect the Black freedom movement and the early homophile movement. We can connect those two movements, Bayard Rustin, Frank Kameny, and Randy Wicker, through FBI surveillance and from informants within these organizations, Cervini said. They were the ones informing the FBI that the gays, the homosexuals, were learning from and discussing copying the Black freedom movement. It says this idea of a coalition between these two organizations, that the Black freedom movement might be inspiring this other group of American citizens who are also marginalized, and the fact that they may both be taking to the streets, perhaps in coordination. That is what scared them the most, Cervini said of the FBI and Southern racist segregationists. So it was all influenced by intersection. It says in some cities there was more of a coalition and less borrowing. The idea of one movement having an influence over the other could give the false notion that the fight for Black civil rights was comprised entirely of Black activists and the fight for LGBTQ rights was solely made up of whites, cautioned Stephen Fullwood. It says, there's Black people in parts of both of these movements, Fullwood said, noting that there were Black people involved in both the Mattachine Society and Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian rights groups. So it says many major legal gains for the LGBTQ people are also in part due to arguments developed by civil rights lawyers. The legal strategy challenging racial segregation, which was pioneered by the NAACP in the 1940s, was really the wellspring from which the LGBTQ equality movement grew. In the 1940s and 50s, Thurgood Marshall, who led the NAACP, spent a decade challenging segregation on public transportation, in restaurants, and in public schools. So Marshall argued a number of cases related to segregation, and then in the mid-50s, he argued Board versus Board of Education in front of the Supreme Court, which ruled that the U.S. state laws segregating schools were unconstitutional. So so-called Black leaders gave them the blueprint. This is the history we need to know as well, family. We need to know our history about how we got here, what happened to our people, and yes, some were forced to do some things to survive. And then we have to also know that some entered into covenants and agreements that impact us spiritually. The enemy does not care if the agreement was made directly or tacitly. A tacit agreement is one that is made between parties that is not explicitly stated, but it's implied through their actions or behaviors. When you don't cast things down that go against Yah's word, the enemy considers it consent. The author says there has been significant overlap between the civil rights and LGBTQ equality movements, and that's a key takeaway. So because we all had the same goal, he's saying, we should all be lumped in together. It goes on to say what we have to appreciate is that the arguments that were used in the civil rights movement in the 1960s involved LGBTQ people. So because they were involved, they should have the same rights. It goes on to say, outlining the group's position on the two emerging movements, Newton wrote, whatever your personal opinions and your insecurities about homosexuality and the various liberation movements among homosexuals and women, we should just try to unite them in a revolutionary fashion. How in the world can you place skin color and ethnicity in the civil rights category? What gives them that right? The Most High gave us our identity as a race. That right did not come from man. You all. Okay, let's see what you all had to say about all of this.
Let's get into some of these comments. I know you had a lot to say. Okay, Brother Andre from Trinidad. Welcome to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How you doing, Sister Alma? Dennis, how are you? So a lot of comments. I'm trying to scroll through some. I know I covered a lot. How are you, Roderick? You got to catch the live tonight. All right, good for you. So let's see. Look, I know some of this is hard because we had family members, participating in the civil rights movement, and yeah. We feel that it was the catalyst that allowed us to get our rights, quote unquote rights, but they can't give us something that the Most High had already given to us. Brother Harold says, tell the truth, they had always ticked me off. All right then. Well, yeah. Let's see. Okay, Minister G. Hannah, he didn't get his money through merit base. Okay, I assume you're talking about this president. All right, yeah, Dina, yes, Sherelle. So sad my entire family refused to wake up. Well, with everything that's going on, they won't have much of a choice here. Very soon, they won't have a choice. Saul said their judgment is coming. We absolutely know that. We certainly know that. It is coming. So Mr. Original School talking about the gatekeepers, and there's a lot of them. There are a lot of them. The Boule, these frat brothers, sorors, yeah. A lot of our people were sellouts. I mean, we hate to say that, but it is what it is. They were sellouts. They wanted what they were selling. They wanted the high life, and they were willing to do whatever it would take to get that, and it didn't matter who they had to sell out. So the unfortunate thing is, and I say that this often, we rise and fall as a people, as a nation. So, yeah, they got us into a lot. Lizette says this is why Malcolm said our human rights were being violated. We should have civil rights as citizens. There you go. There you go. The Most High gave us rights. It's not something they can give to us. Let's see. RY says then DEI and affirmative action should have never been given to the majority. Let's see. The Original School, the civil rights was designed to keep our people pacified, but there is no equality. And aren't we finding that out now? It's an illusion. It most certainly is an illusion. And now it's clear to see on the back end. But at the time, they thought it was a good deal. Lizette says, get this, our men were created in the image of Yah. These demons made us property. Absolutely. Absolutely. Trying to withhold something that the Most High had given to all of us. Berean scholar is quoting Genesis 1:27. So Yah created man in his own image. In the image of Yah created he him. Male and female created he them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dorothy says laws for them and none for us. And Brother Harold is saying it's because they're still jealous. Mm. You all, who's this? P. Whale says separate. We should never beg. I'm assuming them. Is that what you're saying? So I've been pleasantly surprised, you all. I've been watching some short snippets about some of our people. You gotta love our people. Some of the videos were just hilarious about people commenting on segregation, saying, oh, he's trying to bring back segregation. And I was pleasantly surprised because the overwhelming majority that I saw were younger people. And when I say younger, I'm talking about people in their 20s, in their 30s, compared to my age, of course. But it was mostly them who were saying, we don't care. One girl said, oh, don't entice me with a good time. I rolled. I mean, some of those comments were absolutely hilarious. And then some of them were spouting facts about what the civil rights was supposed to, give to our people, but didn't, and the effects of those things afterwards. And I was, like I said, I was pleased to see that, because with that demographic, I can go ahead and admit that I didn't think it would be them saying what they were saying, because oftentimes you think they're not listening, like they're not getting it. But I'm telling you, they're getting it. And the majority were saying, yes, we welcome the opportunity to have our own schools, have our own people teaching our kids. And I was amazed, honestly, by those comments. So, yeah, don't threaten us with a good time, is what one sister said. So let's see what else. Saw says they still don't view us as citizens. Yeah, we definitely know that. They don't. They don't. And that's why Mike Huckabee is making the same comment that he's making about that law. Well, it doesn't really apply because it wasn't based on the will of the people. Really? Really? So when they came out with abortion rights, was that based on the will of the people? When they allowed same-sex marriage, was that based on the will of the people? So yeah, we see these folks, they come out with laws, but then they leave little loopholes so that they can find a way to get around it later. Like, well, there's no such thing unless the person is going to forfeit their rights. Really? But then they don't state which crimes would cause that to happen. So, yeah. The Democrats does absolutely nothing on behalf of their constituents. Well, we know that. We absolutely know that. Let's go on and see what else you all are saying. Minister Gwinnett, we should have rejected it. Yes, but far too often we are so willing to just lock arms and sing kumbaya with everybody because we're seeking validation for our cause, not realizing they are fighting for their own interests. They could care less about what we're fighting for. They're not interested in that. But for us, it's like, yeah, bring everybody in. When they see that all these people are for what we're for, we'll have a greater impact. Well, how is that working out for us? How is that working out for us? Oh, praying for Ann Elijah. They chose to be alphabet people. We didn't choose who we are. We were chosen. Absolutely. That came from the Most High. It's a right that they cannot bestow on us. Phantom Warrior says, the devil is always in the details. No kidding. No kidding. Chosen by Yah says, the states, especially the southern states, will interpret that as we are back. And a lot of them already will do that. They are already seeing how they can leverage it. But we know this is what we're confessing and saying, that everything they plan against us is going to backfire. It's going to backfire. Our people are now lumped in with people, who are fighting for sexual preference. How is that the same? How is that the same? They're going to prosper whether we have or whether they have civil rights or not. Our people were targeted because of skin color. Our rights and the rights of the alphabet community is not the same. And as I said earlier, this was placed upon us as a people, and there are repercussions. This is the same as when our ancestors said, let Messiah's blood be upon us and our children. We were tied to that even though we were not there. Leaders made decisions that brought the nation under a yoke. And it's time for us to renounce that stronghold. We have to cast out everything that is not of the Most High and refuse to be unequally yoked with this Babylonian system. I am not in agreement that our rights are the same. No, it's not. That's a lie straight from the pit of hell, and it needs to go right back there. Go back where it came from. So, yeah, it's amazing that you now have ministers, preachers who are now, championing this cause, trying to, keep the two together, saying we're all on the same team, fighting for the same thing. Absolutely not. No, we're not. We are not. So renounce it. I know I renounce it on behalf of my family, and my husband definitely has been renouncing for a long time. I mean, it's like, But yeah, just like Brother Byron says here, just make up rules and laws as they choose. They don't care. They don't care. So we have to be aware of these things, what they've placed upon us, and cast those things down. Say, I'm not in agreement with this. I am not in agreement. Not for me, not for my family. Yes, that's exactly what happened there. There was a shift. At first, it was about racial equality. Then it became sexual equality. How is that? You cannot give any place to the enemy because he wants to take over. Is Yah getting glory from this? That's my question. That's my question. Is he getting glory from this, family? Was this his strategy? And again, it's not because I'm beating up on our ancestors who thought they were doing the best they could with what they had. But who was the source? Where did the strategy come from? We have to learn from their mistake. We have to learn and not keep repeating these mistakes. Let's go on and see what else some of you are saying. Only 60 Games Played said there was a movie about this on Amazon Prime. I could not watch it. Oh, I didn't see it, and more than likely I won't I won't watch it either. Let's see. Drea says the enemy being led in by prideful and sinful people in our ranks. Yes, and it explains why we can't have sin in our camp. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because Yah is not going to fight for that. He's not fighting for us to be caught up in that. My goodness. Dash T says, that's where we went wrong, trying to be apart instead of set apart. Ooh, say that again. That's a good one. Trying to be apart instead of being set apart. You need to put that one on a t-shirt. Let's see what else we have. Let's see. Yes, Mr. Original School, the Black Panthers movement was infiltrated from within. And remember, Rustin was totally against that. He was against nationalism, except when it came to you know who. Yeah. Anyway, let that, as I said before, certain things need to come down. They need to burn down because they're not of the Most High Yah. All of these practices and things that are not of Him, let the fire of heaven utterly destroy it. We don't need it in our midst. We don't need it. All right, let's see. You all, please don't forget to hit the like button. We definitely appreciate that. Let's see. ROI, oh, I didn't know they had another one. Everyone can forget getting our support with current and future marches, particularly April 5th. They can march on their own. Well, again, because they're fighting for their own cause. It does not line up with what the Most High says. So I, for one, won't be participating. Let's see. Roderick says, the devil been busy a long time. Yes, yes, he has certainly been busy. Certainly. Let's see. Just a few more here. Quick session tonight, short and sweet, per se. Let's see what else we got. Yes, let's see. Shaya says, I can't stand them lumping us together. They believe they have the same oppression as us, and we know that's nowhere near the truth. Absolutely. 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 Savita, get out of here with that mess. Get out of here. Brother Charles says, what does light have to do with darkness? Really? We're not the same. We're not on the same team. And we need to say it loud. We need to make sure it's known. No, we're not in agreement. We are not in agreement. Berean scholar says the moment MLK said he was coming after money, they put him down. There you go. They most certainly did. Have I heard of the Heroines of Jericho? Don't think so. Is this supposed to be a movie? I don't think I've heard about that one. Let's see what else we got here. Our communities were stronger before. Yeah, and really that's what a lot of those young people were saying. And that's why it really, I was pleasantly surprised for the ones I could listen to, but some of them is like, oh my gosh, the profanity was just so extreme. It's like, So for those that I, could tolerate, I was really surprised and just, it was like, wow, even for the people who are not woke, quote unquote, woke as in knowing who we are as a people, they could see that there's something inherently wrong with what we were given. Praying for an Elisha says, we have a case that should be heard before the world's court, before the Most High's court. Morris says, don't they have to sign the bill every so often? Look, they can change it at will. They can change it at will. So yeah, Angie says, wow, I didn't know that the civil rights and the gay rights movement was this closely connected. Very much so, sis. Unfortunately, very much so. And it's sad because it's not the same thing. Ray says the civil rights movement was a setup from the beginning, a different version of slavery. Yeah, because who did it benefit? Who was it benefiting? Queen Mommy says, our youth are ready to separate from them. I'm telling you, something is happening. The Most High is doing something. We need to pay attention to what he's doing in the background. Yehuda bloodline, the indoctrination was built within and delivered through the American school system, is so deeply entrenched that most refuse to embrace obvious truths about this intent. Absolutely right, particularly when our kids go to college. And actually, this is when I first started learning about this intersectionality, speaking with a group of college students. And almost all of them, even though they were going to different colleges, almost all of them were talking about intersectionality. It's like, oh, we got to look at where things overlap. And okay, so yeah, they are really trying to push that agenda to make us think that we're fighting for the same thing. It's the same cause. And I absolutely reject it. Absolutely reject it. We're not on the same team. We are not joining hands and singing Kumbaya. Absolutely not. You stand 2 says we're actually not citizens of this place, just passing through. Absolutely. Absolutely. We know that things are about to change significantly. But while we're here, we have to deal with these certain issues. Let's see. Matt says, I just learned that birthright citizenship is not constitutional. It's a Scotus, a Scout's ruling. A Scout's ruling. Wow. Wow. All right. So we're going to wrap up here again. Short and sweet session again. Remember to hit the like and help us out. Thank you, moderators, for everything that you do to support the ministry. Thank you to all of those behind the scenes supporters and donors. Thank you for all that you do to help us with this work. Just know that it is much appreciated. So thank you. All right, so we're going to end it there, family. Again, thank you all, especially those who are tuning in for the first time. Welcome to you. Peace and blessings to you. And join me next time.